Hello and welcome to Rewind Reviews, the podcast where Chris and I seem to swap roles every week as to who's really grumpy about a movie.
It was you last week, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. It's your turn.
It's my turn.
It was you
Goodwill Hunting.
It was
more
you
like. Huh?
I was going to say, I think it was you the week before for Gremlins, but...
Yeah, exactly. All right, I'll be grumpy about this one. Goodwill Hunting, more like deep emotional scenes threaded together. That's... I think there's a discussion.
Okay, based on that, Chris, I suspect it's going to be me that's the grumpy one this week. Deep emotional scenes.
I'm joking.
Threaded together.
I don't think it's... no, I'm not grumpy. I don't think either of us are going to be grumpy this week.
That's what I'm saying. I'm agreeing with you because based on what you just said, it's going to be me because the sentence "deep emotional scenes," I think there's an incorrect word somewhere in there. I suspect we're gonna come to a discussion about whether it's actually deep or if it just really thinks it is. I would describe it as shallow emotional scenes.
Wow.
But, we'll have a chat. No, I don't think it's a bad movie. I'm going to say it up front. I really like this movie, but we'll get into the details. But it's definitely not as smart as it thinks it is. That's for sure.
I think we did have a. I don't think it's quite as bad as last week when we were like, God, imagine if Goodwill Hunting was bad. But I certainly watched it going, oh, there's some discussion points about just how cohesive this is.
Yeah, and I think, you know what, in terms of structure, like, I do think they get away with it with something they do at the very, very, very end. Weirdly, like, one very simple trick that is, like, one of the first things they teach you when you learn screenwriting is actually just executed so perfectly here. It tricks you into thinking the movie is more cohesive than it is. Because of the way they make the final choice scene, but we'll I guess we'll come back to the details, but yeah.
Yeah, the one that got me was the Alex Skarsgård's Stellan Skarsgård.
Stellan Skarsgård, that's right.
His character Gerald and obviously Will like have this scene really early on where they're like fighting and they don't like each other, and in the very next scene they're doing maths and he's tussling his hair, and I was like, wow, these two, their relationship has changed quickly. But anyway, we'll come to it. What are my memories? So I remember this is one of those films that, like, you know, everyone in kind of our age, sort of, you know, approaching mid-30s, you know, it came out in 97, and I think it's one of those films that everyone kind of had our age and had seen, and it was one of those first sort of, you know, oh, it's deep. It's, you know, we all sort of watched it when it came out, and even though we were young, it was like, you know, it was a really kind of accessible Oscar movie.
I believe what the sentence you're reaching for there is, now this is cinema. It's the sort of
it's that sort of thing.
This is sort of pretentious shit someone of our age that was into films would have said about this film at the time.
Yeah, we'd watch this film and feel smug that we'd watch this film and introduce it to their parent, which I did. I remember sitting my mum and dad down and being like, "You got to watch this film. It's amazing. It's art." And they were kind of like,
"Did your mum and dad?
Huh?
What did your mum and dad think of it?"
I can remember them being like, "Yeah, no, it was good," but not being like blown away by it.
Yeah.
And now I'm like, oh, I can see why they wouldn't be. But now I would not watch this film and go, "This is a film my mum and dad need to watch." But I remember having it on video.
Really track though, doesn't it? With this notion, that really tracks with my contention about this film, which is that it's very good at it. Well, it's not very good at it, but it's pretending it's smarter than it is the whole time. And I think when you're younger, you're more likely to fall for that trick, I think.
Completely.
Yeah,
completely.
I think that's what it is. I do think that's what it is. It won
but
Oscars
it had
and
it
stuff, though. It tricked a bunch of crusty old white guys.
Say that again, sorry?
It won Oscars, so it tricked a bunch of crusty old white guys.
But again, at that age, we're not thinking about the Oscars in that way, are we?
No, we're not. No. But I'm saying a bunch of old white guys vote for those Oscars, so it's not just young, impressionable people that thought this film was good at the time. I guess was my point.
Yeah. But I had it on video, had it on DVD then as well, I think. And yeah, it was very much one of those. No, this is cinema movies. What about yourself? I assume similar story.
Yeah, a little bit. I guess slightly different in that just through circumstance, I didn't initially come to this in that wave that everyone did. I remember a lot of people talking about it, and I hadn't had a chance to see it myself, which is weird because I saw everything Robin Williams was in. But I think part of my brain looked at this movie and went, I don't know, do I want to see Robin Williams do serious? And I think that was my very earliest reason to be like, I'll get to it, but maybe not right now. Do you know what I mean? Like it was like I was less interested in Robin, because to me, any movie Robin Williams in it was a Robin Williams movie. I don't know. These two are the young kids that are the leads or whatever. I don't care. Robin Williams is in this movie, so that's the only like thing I was taking into it as an absolutely massive Robin Williams fan as a young person. And then obviously a couple of years go by, and like it's been talked to me a lot. Like you hear about it, people, impressed that this is like, this very clever, how did you describe it initially? Like this sort of very emotional, very complex sort of character thing. And
yeah,
that like intrigued me, but not enough to immediately watch it. I don't reckon I saw this film for like 4 or 5 years. I think I saw this, I was much older, but maybe college age, maybe by the time I actually sat down and watched it. And I still really enjoyed it. I remember really liking it at the time, being quite impressed with. I think now, we'll talk about that later actually, because that's more of a reviewing the movie thing. But I remember really enjoying it. And then I think I saw it a couple of years later with Nadia again. We just it was just on one day, or we had it on VHS or something, and we put it on, or DVD maybe a few years after that. And I don't think I've seen it since. I think I've seen it twice in my life until yesterday. I think I watched it the very initial time, enjoyed it, saw it again with Nadia a few years later, just as a sort of a lazy evening sort of thing to put on. Reasonably enjoyed it then, but I don't have any sort of like passionately fond memories of the film. But I did remember it being like a really well constructed, great film. And there are many things to love in this film. I would say that for anyone worried we're about to spend 2 hours, because I've repeatedly sort of gone, it is smarter than it's not as smart as it thinks it is, that I'm going to spend the next sort of hour and a half of this podcast ragging on the film. There's tons of great stuff in this film. So if we're doing our usual sort of up top, do we recommend you watch this or not before we review it? I absolutely do. I think it's what a fascinating time capsule. Of a kind of filmmaking and storytelling that just does not exist anymore. I don't even know if there's a word for what I'm trying to describe with this movie. We'll come to it, but it's really well done. It's really well acted. I think the music's really nice. It's shot well, and while the story, as Chris pointed out, isn't maybe as cohesive as it wants to be, when it finishes, they just about land on the right side of the line on that for me. With a pretty simple storytelling technique that works quite effectively here, I think.
Yep, I agree. I think it's one of those films that you got to watch. I think it's not perfect by any means. We'll talk about that, but actually, it's one of those. The more you let this film just wash over you, the more you'll enjoy it. And I think even despite those challenges, I think we've both experienced on this rewatch, I think actually the emotional beats will work for you. Some of the powerful scenes will work for you. I think, there's an episode of Community that spoofs it, and if you've not seen it, that episode doesn't make any fucking sense. So I think it's definitely worth watching. If you haven't seen this, go stop, watch it, come back and listen to us dissect. But I think there's a lot of stuff that works in it. And, even just like as an achievement, Matt Damon, Ben Affleck, these two young guys that managed to get this film made and have it have the impact it has is worth watching. And there's some fantastic performances. Ben Affleck does a lot with, not much screen time. What?
Sorry.
I think he does.
I think Ben Affleck's great in this movie, but it's so funny that the one scene that he's genuinely god-awful in this movie, where he just looks like a deer caught in headlights that's repeating the words to himself, I'm acting, I'm acting, I'm acting, is the most pivotal one. And it's so funny that you name him first, because there's literally only one scene in this movie where somebody just looks like baby's first acting job, and they don't know how to handle it, and it's Ben Affleck.
Well, yeah, that's true. That scene. But there's a lot of subtle stuff in the other scenes I was thinking of.
No, when he's being casual at himself, it's great. But you can tell that he knew how important his last scene was in this movie. And oh boy, does he drop the ball! It's literally he's like just stiff and I'm acting. Be very conscious of where your eyes are looking right now. Be very conscious of how your face is moving right now. It's just. And again, I think he's a good actor. I know that he gets a lot of flack, but I think he's a really capable actor, and he's been good in things since this movie. And and he is good in this movie also. But there's one particular scene that's genuinely some of the worst acting I've seen committed to a feature like a fully produced Hollywood feature film in quite some time. It's bad.
Robin Williams, obviously stunning. Minnie Driver, very good. Despite, again, I don't think she's served brilliantly by the script either, to be honest. You can make an argument against that, which we'll probably talk about. I think there is an argument against that. It's not actually, in my memory, this film was a love story. It's not particularly. It's a very much what happens to Will. And Matt Damon. It gives sort of a strong performance, but again, one that is stronger in some scenes than others. But I would absolutely recommend this film. So that's we've teased quite a bit, Dan. Let's dive into reviews.
Yes.
What were some of your first? What were you turn it on? The movie starts unfolding. And what are some of your first sort of... Sometimes in this podcast we have these moments of, I don't remember this feeling, or this is surprising me on a rewatch. What were some of your first thoughts like that?
Yeah, I want to take a kind of what I think is kind of a point you were making, because you teased this on the when we were texting about it yesterday. But yeah, I think I had a similar experience to you, that there's a certain amount of this movie that wasn't in my memory. I didn't remember how much trouble Will was getting himself in. I knew my memory of the movie is that his life was kind of stuck in this rut. He had this crappy little shack that he essentially lived in. He did this janitoring job, and it was about he'd gotten in his own way too much. He wouldn't get out of that, even though he had the potential to move out of that situation. And other people were trying to help him achieve that. I don't think I remembered, and I think this is the same for you, and again, I don't want to step on a point that I know you were looking to make, but I didn't remember the basketball court fight. I don't remember the stuff that gets him in trouble with the police. I didn't remember the fact that the all of the stuff that he's then doing was court mandated. That element of the script was not in my memory. Almost everything else was the stuff with Minnie Driver, all the stuff with Ron Williams, all the stuff with the math, all the stuff with Ben Affleck. Most of the stuff after that point, I was like, oh, I do remember most of this movie, but holy hell, I did not remember that in the start in that section any of the reasons that got him forced into this sort of situation with all the sort of the court case and him sort of being forced to do both therapy and math. Imagine that. What's my punishment, Your Honor? I've been found guilty. Therapy and math. No. But yeah, it's pretty. I didn't remember that at all. Truthfully.
No, I didn't. And especially how haphazard it is. The fight in particular, I was just like, oh, okay. We're just, they're so. The characters don't. It's not like they're rough city kids getting into ruckuses throughout the rest of the movie. Particularly, they're just guys that like to meet up, have a drink, and have a laugh.
I think that's actually the reason you forget. I don't mean to interrupt. Sorry, I'll let you. I just want to say, while you're on that point, I think that's the reason it's so much, so easily forgotten, and why we both experience the same thing. It's because, quite frankly, because it's not in any other part of the movie. He's not going out drinking, causing trouble, getting in trouble with the police at any other point after that. It just feels like fake character building. Like, just where they've gone, here's some scenes to tell you this about the character, and now we're not going to actually make any of that part of his character at all. We're going to go a different route. Because we've done that now, tick. So yeah, it's definitely a bit of a flaw in the film, I think, that causes that to be forgotten.
It's like they're at war with, because the guys they start the fight with sort of pick on someone just before and stuff, but it's not really justified. Like, it's almost sort of.
Doesn't Matt Damon give a line about how one of them was his high school bully or something?
Maybe I must have missed that, but yeah, maybe.
Yeah, Matt Damon's character gives a line about how that guy used to pick on him in high school and like beat him up all the time, and that's why it's Damon's character that really runs in first and goes, "Hey, do you remember me from high school?" and then just starts wailing on the guy.
Yeah, it's definitely Damon that goes in first. Yeah, so that element kind of took me by surprise, like you've just said. Another one, and I think there's a reason for this for me, which is that I didn't get exposed to Kevin Smith's work much later, but I had no recollection of how much you can feel Kevin Smith's influence on some of the dialogue scenes. Like, some of the in the way the subject matters and the sort of kind of, I guess, earnest rawness to the way they're speaking sometimes and the things they're speaking about. Not every scene, certainly not the more dramatic scenes, but a lot of the scenes with sort of the four friends talking round, chatting and sharing stories. I was like really taken by like, oh, this feels incredibly Kevin Smith. And obviously I've heard him talk about the film. I know he was a producer. Actually, at one point I paused it and the Amazon trivia on the screen at the time was that it's the highest grossing film with his name attached. So I knew all of that stuff, and I knew there were even...
Well, Affleck had worked with Kevin Smith at this point as well, twice.
Yes, yeah.
And so I think that it's hard to imagine that Affleck not sort of... his screenwriter buddy Kevin Smith, like, sort of borrows some of his, like, not techniques, but approach maybe to certain dialogue scenes.
There were rumours that Kevin Smith had a hand in writing it even at the time, and I've heard all those stories and kind of been like laughing at them. And then I guess this is the first time I've watched it since I've been way more exposed to Kevin Smith's work, and I've watched it like, oh, I can totally see why people thought that, like why that was a thing. So that I will say
after Clerks and after some of the early Kevin Smith films, a huge wave of new writers and filmmakers came through, and Smith influenced a lot of them. Like Smith's work has never been, hugely popular amongst general audiences, the average casual film goer. But his work was always immensely popular with other creatives, other filmmakers. He's inspired. He did inspire almost a whole generation of filmmakers. He really did. I know people don't like to think of him that way because it's got goofy old Kevin Smith, but like he genuinely did. Like Clerks spoke to a whole generation, and told them that they can make movies that involve scenes with just the conversations them and their friends naturally have bullshitting, it's fine. Like that can give your movie context, or it can give it like realism. It can bring a lot to the film. And the amount of movies I've seen from the sort of late 90s, early thousands, where you go, oh, this person grew up watching Kevin Smith movies, and I'm not saying they all have that all the time, because only Kevin Smith ever really released a Kevin Smith movie in the sense of like the whole movie top to bottom was that style. But you saw it seeping into scenes in almost everything. So while I understand why some people do speculate Kevin Smith helped them with the script, I'm not convinced that it wasn't just that Ben Affleck was sort of rather taken with Smith's approach to writing. And thought it would fit the friends with the scenes. The scenes with the friends.
Yeah, I think it absolutely was, but that was a real surprise to me. Like I was like, oh, like I just hadn't remembered that aspect of the film for the reasons I spoke about. And then the other big surprise, let's use this to dive into the critique, is how much it does feel sometimes like, the jumps sometimes. I've already talked about that one where suddenly they have a better. I guess the challenges I have with this film were a surprise. I guess what it was in my head is not what I found it was on rewatch. There were things that really stuck out, like just kind of as an intro, and then we'd dive into them. The poor Gerald's assistant character. That character's one of the weirdest characters in film. Like, just sort of says, like, with a really deadpan voice, some really like some statements that are meant to be emotive, and then doesn't really do it. Like, it's one of the most put upon characters in film ever. Like, just completely not appreciated by those around him. A very
but also,
bizarre
like,
performance.
not relevant. Like, I think what's
weird.
the purpose of that character? That's what I can't get over. That character's existence is fine if it becomes a plot point, but it doesn't ever. He doesn't contribute or anything to the film other than at one point he has a frank conversation with Will, which, quite frankly, is a thing that Will needs to hear from other people, not from this random guy. So that line could have come out of absolutely any other character's mouth, and it would have felt better than having this weird sort of subplot. What a strange character.
Weird.
Yeah, 100%.
So weird. So there was that. There was it does just feel sometimes like we got scene, big emotional scene, and it's like, even at the end, like it's almost like Sean's character goes, well, the end of the movie's coming, so I better do this big emotive speech that he's given me no signs he's ready for. Like, and that's a very powerful scene, and it still does play, but part of you watching it with, I guess, a more critical framework is going, you've shown that their relationship is building, you've shown that they're becoming friends. I'm not sure you've shown that given the argument he's just had with the professor, I'm not sure you've shown that he's ready to randomly push him to this point. Like, it almost completely goes against the argument Sean's just had with, I think his name's Gerald, isn't it? Mm-hmm. They have this big argument about how he's not ready, he shouldn't be pushed, etc. And then it's like someone goes, Sean, movie's ending in a bit, mate. And he's like, oh, fuck, all right, fine. It's not your fault. And it still plays, like, it's still a great scene, but that is a shining example of an issue I think this movie has, where sometimes it feels like a number of scenes threaded together more than my memory of it was. And then the other kind of pin to put in, and then we'll come back to, is the Minnie Driver character. Like, Minnie Driver plays that role spectacularly and really makes it work. But I didn't remember how much the film is Will's story, and like Minnie Driver's character is simply used as a catalyst for Will's story. Not simply used, maybe that's a bit harsh, but it feels like in many moments is used as a catalyst for Will's story. She commits to him and is constantly like, I love you, a lot for someone where you can't help but feel most people in that position, especially when he like slams on the wall and stuff, would just be like, well, all right then, like, fuck off and I'll go on my own. Like, but she sticks with him in a way that I don't know if they've done enough to show that relationship get to a point where she's going, well, I know I love him, and I know that even though he's troubled, I absolutely love this man and will stand by him. They sort of take them from new, exciting relationship to a deep love that can handle anything incredibly quickly for the purpose of pushing Will's story along, as opposed to really giving Minnie Driver's character a story or an arc or anything like that. I mean, no one really gets an arc in this film apart from Sean and Will and maybe the professor. But yeah, so we'll probably put a pin and come back to the Minnie Driver thing and discuss the scenes.
I think that's what we're tackling while we're here. I would agree, but I think the only reason I think they get away with it is because like that is the case throughout the entire movie with all characters. I think if it was just her character that got shortchanged in that way for the sake of Will's story, then that would be very frustrating. But it becomes clear at a certain point, Will is the story that's being... Will's story is the story that's being told here, and everyone else is tertiary to that, and everyone else is a bit player in his big play, and it does feel like they exist to push his story forward, but sometimes I think movies can get away with this when they go all in on that idea, because I think there are some people out there who live their lives seeing themselves as the center of their own little world, and very rarely consider the very, very little consideration to those around them. And I think in a weird way that is kind of one of the things going on with the character of Will in this movie. I do think he is a little sort of, he's both got a lot of like self-doubt, but he also, I think, is a little weirdly self-obsessed. And as a result, the story sort of revolves around him in that way. And I think he's very lucky that a lot of people gather at the same time that can, like, three very different figures enter his life at roughly the same time to very conveniently push him into that. And I think that is the problem, isn't it? It's not so much that those characters only exist to help him, it's that they all feel contrived in, like, they've all appeared at the exact perfect moment to do that. That's where you feel like the hand of the writer, as we've described it in other podcasts. That feeling that you can see the writer wanting to get the story to from A to B, and forcing that to happen in a way that doesn't quite feel natural, doesn't quite feel earned. And I think that maybe is the bigger issue. It's not so much that the characters just exist to support that. To support Will, I think that's fine if written a little better. I think the reason it sticks out here is quite simply that it's three of them all showing up in the character's life at the same moment and colliding together in a way that pushes him into the next bit of his life. Because that's what this is a movie about. This is a movie about because the movie isn't really about his intelligence or his love story or his math whizness. It's not about any of that. It's about his inability to trust others, be himself. It's a film about someone sort of, running on the spot because they're too scared to sort of put themselves out there in their life. He's willing to throw away or sabotage opportunities he has. He doesn't see any value in himself. But also, rather like contradictorily, is also got a massive ego. So it's about getting him out of that rut. Basically, that's the premise of the movie. And to do that, all these people have to sort of show up, force that to happen to him, force that change, and then crack on with their lives. You assume they all have something more interesting going on outside of that, but the movie doesn't give you that. So that's, I think for me, I totally agree with that criticism. It's one of the reasons, again, I think the movie isn't as clever as it or deep as it thinks it is. But it's because it's really thinks it's like, oh, this is incredibly intricate character. Will is such an interesting character, but really he's just a guy with self-doubt and self-sabotages, and I know tons of people like that. That's not, he's not as unique as the movie makes him out to be.
No, well, the movie does a lot of that with the whole genius element, doesn't it? That's how the movie makes him feel unique. He's solving things that other people have taken 30 years to solve and stuff. I don't know.
The movie keeps telling us that, though. Like, how many actual examples of him being an intelligent person are in the movie, other than when he just regurgitates like, smart person nonsense?
Yeah, there's a bit later on where Minnie Driver's trying to solve something, and he goes down, sits on a bench, solves it in like a couple of seconds, and takes it back up to her, and it's like, now spend the day with me. And when that happened, I was like, oh yeah, he's really smart. We've not seen him solve a problem other than the ones on the board at the beginning and stuff in ages.
But again, it's all like, see, I quite like that scene for what it says about the character in terms of his.
They just don't do enough.
Because that to me is like a Jack Pearson from This Is Us kind of like love gesture. It's a big swing. He that's him demonstrating he's there for her, and he doesn't care, and he wants to spend that time with her. And it's not that scene does. The reason that scene works for me is it doesn't It's not just an excuse for them to go, look how smart he is. Do you see how smart he is? That's when the film is working, because it's both at the same
completely.
time.
That's why I bring it up.
But there are so many scenes where it's just like, watch him awkwardly be too smart for no reason. Like the scene when she asks him to go for a coffee, and he's like, oh, we could go for caramels, because when you think about it, that's equally as arbitrary as going for a coffee. And it's like, what? Like, who wrote this? Like, who wrote that and thought any human anywhere ever would say something like that? And even if you go, well, he's so unique, he's so smart, I still refuse to believe somebody could be that socially inept, especially this character who's proven himself to be socially inept elsewhere in the movie.
That scene's one of my is one of my favourite moments of Minnie Driver making this work more than the script does, because she kind of reacts, and as she walks away, her and her friend laugh in a what a knob but kind of cute way, and I don't think that's in the script. Doesn't say, as Minnie Driver walks away, she indicates that she knows he's just being a bit of a knob, but finds that a little bit endearing. Like, she's added that, because otherwise you're sat there, I bet on the page you're sat there going, why the fuck is she going to meet up with him? Like, because that caramel thing should have been enough to make her go, nah, all right.
That caramel thing should have been enough to make her go, serial killer.
Yeah, exactly, and that's her performance adding to that.
Yeah, it's the deliberate writing. They're like, oh, he's so smart that for him, going for a coffee is like really arbitrary. He's so smart. He's realized that coffee is just this arbitrary thing people do. Like, it's exactly what dumb people think smart people think. It's so it's bad. That's bad. There's a lot of that in the movie.
And also, I don't think the movie does enough to really, like, it so brushes off, like, what's he going to do? He could do anything. No. Tell me specifically, like, other than the code cracking thing, tell me specifically what high-profile millionaire job he can do with his mix of abilities. Show me specifically what top security engineering firm is going to go, this guy that's been in prison loads and is currently out on parole. Oh, wait, what? Oh, he sold some equations really quickly. Well, you know, when you got it, you got it. Like, explain that more.
And I think that's the thing as well. It's like the movie's trying to be too many things, I think, as well. Like that's part of why some of this stuff structurally sort of falls apart, because nothing really gets the dedication that it needs. You know, it's because it's trying to be a movie about a guy discovering himself through therapy, but it's also a movie about a guy like. It's a magic genius that's like discovered. He's a janitor and he's discovered to be a genius and but then they kind of forget that plot. Like you know, the movie really switches gears after he gets discovered as a genius and focuses on the therapy sort of can't get out of his own way side of Will's story than the sort of savant level genius. That has all these career options. They keep telling us he has all these career options, but it's very, very rarely shown. There are two scenes in which it's demonstrated he has these options where he has meetings or whatever. But even those are sort of like usually thrown away by the movie. One of them he actually has Ben Affleck show up to, which is a funny scene. It's a very funny scene. Ben Affleck sort of turns up to pretends to be a genius. It is amusing, but it's not really doing anything for the plot. Because at a certain point you go, so what's the plot? The plot's he's learning about himself. That's the plot.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because the movie feels like it has a plot early on. I think an aimless movie is fine, but don't trick me into thinking you have a really succinct plot by starting the movie with a sequence of events that feel like the movie has a plot. You know, like him being discovered, being the one writing the board. Like that sort of 10-minute section from the movie taken out. That's a different movie to what everything else is. Because that's like a really like A to B. He does this, so then this happens. Then that happens because this happens, and it leads to him, you know, being found in jail for, I guess, assault. I assume. By the professor who's realized he's the one doing solving the equations. Like, the way that all plays out, is all very plot heavy. And then after that, the movie just goes, now here's a collection of scenes where these different people interact.
Yeah. So talk to us about because I've talked a bit about that. Talk to us about your feelings about that, and well, obviously, other than the frustration you've just kind of indicated about it.
Yeah, I mean, well, that's that kind of. I think that kind of sums it up. I think it's you know, I was just talking about that very thing for several minutes, so I feel like we should probably, if you've nothing more to add to that, I don't know if I have anything more to add to that point. I just think structurally they've dropped the ball a bit here.
Well,
it's so clearly written by two people who've never written a script before, I think.
But you referenced earlier there was you feel that the ending kind of helps to make up for that. So I meant,
sorry. Yes, you're right. Thank you for making sure I don't lose the thread of what I've said in the podcast 10 minutes.
I was trying to subtly do it.
You were being subtle, and then I blew it, and then sorry, you're right. I think the reason they end up sort of getting away with it, and the reason I would still say this movie is worth watching, is the ending. And the way it all comes together. Because while the sort of second and third act of this movie are a lot of just people talking and sharing their feelings on the situation, on Will, rather than actual plot progression, towards the end of the movie, we have a bunch of things come together at once. We have the situation with Ben Affleck's character, which I know that Community spoofs this scene, but it in the movie it actually makes a reasonable amount of sense when Ben Affleck's character says to Matt Damon, you know, my best part of my day is that 20 seconds when I walk up your driveway and I think there's a chance you might be gone. Obviously, not because he wants his friend out of the way, but he knows his friend is worth more than he's currently letting himself be, and it would be a joy for him to think of his friend as having moved on when he's so capable. And that's actually a really sweet notion, in my opinion. I think it works reasonably well. I think Ben Affleck really plays that scene, this scene where he says that, really well. Then we have his relationship with the Robin Williams character, which very much starts, or really kicks off once they get out of the antagonistic phase, with this really beautiful story Robin Williams' character tells about how he met his wife. And it starts with him describing this incredibly important baseball game that he had tickets to. And Matt Damon's like, oh my God, did you rush the field with everyone else? And he's like, of course I fucking didn't. I was having drinks with the woman I married. And it's this really great scene. And it leads to the what he said to his friends, which is, what was it? I'm off to see about a girl or something like that.
He said, sorry, I got to see about a girl.
I want to see about a girl. Okay, fine, yeah. So that's the line. And then we have this third plot with Minnie Driver where regardless of how bumpy we think that might be in terms of how they convince us of it, where they end up is that she loves him like almost unconditionally, and there's this really brilliant, a couple of scenes actually, where you know he loves her. They do enough to convince you that's probably true, but he won't say it because he won't let someone in because he doesn't want to be hurt, basically. I think Robin Williams' character lays it out later in the movie. He says something about he's afraid he'll get hurt, so he pushes people away before they can leave him. And you've got these three things that all feel quite disparate. And the way the movie ends up feeling really coherent is that all three get wrapped up at the exact same moment towards the end of the movie. And that's genuinely very clever. So actually, there's a fourth plot as well that's happening, which is where this professor is arguably wrongly pushing Will to get a job. So towards the end of the movie, Will's getting the job. Well, basically, he fucks off, so resolving the Ben Affleck thing. Ben Affleck shows up and realizes he's gone. He throws the job away because he didn't really want that. That's not what he wanted, thus kind of wrapping up the plot of the professor trying to lead him maybe down the wrong path. And then he leaves a note for Robin Williams' character that says, I went to see about a girl. And then he's off to go get Minnie Driver.
Yeah, and the other
name I can't remember. And for me, the reason this movie's second and third acts, which meander around, end up feeling, I think, on a casual viewing, not a critical viewing, like what Chris and I have just done, like they work, like it works really well, is that ending, the way it ties all the plots together, in 20 seconds in a way that's so satisfying. I honestly don't know how. Like, that's so genius. And that is, for me, like, how you leave the movie not feeling like the structure was kind of fucked. Because it all feels so intentional when you get to that ending. And I just can't express enough how much. The only way I could explain why that or how that worked so well was to actually just sort of lay out what physically happens, because it's so good. I don't even know like how to talk about it, sort of theoretically. I just have to basically explain to you, the listener, what happens to make it understood how simple.
Yeah, well, I think the scene where Sean and Gerald argue does a lot of the legwork for it. That's a very clever scene as well. Like when
tons of it is all legwork. Like the "I love you" stuff with Minnie Driver sets up that the scene with the baseball game. There's loads of scenes that feel meandering and out of nowhere, but they're actually all leading us to this ending where all four plots, as it were, are just swept up into one moment that solves all of them at once. It's kind of genius.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Like, I love Robin Williams really lays out, like, you question why he's friends with those apes, as you call them. Well, it's because he knows any of them would come in here and attack you with a knife, and he's never known loyalty like that. Like, he really kind of maps out Will, and like, but in doing that, it's quite clever, because in the context of the scene it works. He's a therapist giving his opinion on a case, but in the context of the movie, it says to the audience, this is why Will is the way he is. Will hears a fair bit of that, and it's that's, like you say, there's some very clever screenwriting techniques in there.
Yeah, if you hadn't figured it out yet, this is what Will's deal is.
Yeah,
I like that scene a lot, but I do think that scene is there to sort of like make it obvious. I do kind of wish they'd let it be a bit more subtle, personally, but I like the scene. The scene plays out really well.
Of course, but I think it's decisions like that make this one of the most popular Oscar movies, because it's decisions like that make it one of the most accessible. Like, right. Make it really accessible and broad to people, rather than trying to be too nuanced and subtle, which has, from a kind of broader audience, alienated some Oscar movies. And I don't mean like specifically movies that have been nominated for Oscars. I'm using that as a byword for, dramas like this and stuff.
Yeah, these kind of like prestige award season movies. I know what you're referring to. So for you, that was kind of how it got away with it for me. Was there anything that you picked up on that kind of made you feel a little bit better about that sort of messy structure? That lack of sort of almost that feeling like a collection of scenes rather than like this coherent narrative. Like, was there anything that you thought made it helped it work beyond that, or do you sort of?
Nothing that you didn't cover. I suppose the only thing to add is that also, some of those, if it's a collection of scenes, some of those scenes are fucking great. Some of the. And
that's the thing, isn't it? Each scene in isolation is a great scene. This is one thing I was sort of talking about, hinted at earlier. We didn't get to. For me, what's one of the things that's so great about this movie is they just don't make films like this anymore, where the scenes have these big swings in them, like just these like characters doing big bold things that are just like for the fuck of it. I mean, again, the scene where he essentially goes off and solves her homework so that she can go on the date with him. I'm trying to think of other ones, the 3 minutes of silence. Not the 3 minutes of silence. The 3 minutes when he first goes into the room with Robin Williams, and it's like this like mental back and forth. Like, I don't know, there are scenes with where the characters make like really bold choices. Not just the ones where they're talking. I suppose that scene with Robin Williams is probably a bad character. Is a bad idea. Is a bad example. Just scenes where like something. I'm trying to think of it. Why can't my brain come up with more examples right now? But there are just scenes where they have their own little narrative, I guess is what I'm talking about. Like, instead of being part of the wider film's narrative, I'm just not thinking of any more examples than the one where he does her homework.
But it's even some of the bigger scenes. That's what I was about to say. Was like, that's, I think, one of the reasons this film works and has stood out in people's mind is because people have kind of gone, you have those moments where you're like, oh, I want to watch that scene, and that could be the how do you like them apples scene. It could be that entire scene in general in the bar. It could be the it wasn't your fault scene, which whilst watching it with a critical view made me go, this feels a bit sudden given the argument they've just had. In most people's memory and going back to it, it's just going back to that scene and that moment, and all of these moments work so well in isolation, regardless of whether I feel the movie had got Minnie Driver and Matt Damon's characters to a point of the "I love you" argument scene. The acting, the writing, everything about that scene works in isolation, and it's kind of especially the more distance you have from a movie, those are the things you remember. So I think as well as kind of the techniques of bringing it all together, there's also the fact that if a movie is going to feel slightly like a collection of scenes, well then the best experience of that is when the scenes in isolation are fucking brilliant, and that's definitely the case here, I think.
Thank you for expressing what I could not, for the life of me, manage to cover. I don't know why my brain wouldn't allow me to properly, it is incredible how good each single piece of this narrative is, even if the whole doesn't quite work as well as maybe it could have or should have. You're absolutely right. Like, each individual scene plays out top to bottom like its own story and has really, really good sort of... I think they were just smart enough to know each scene kind of needed its own clear beginning, middle, and end, and that also gives the movie a feeling of a narrative because each scene has one. It starts in one place and always ends in another. It's very each scene. No, I don't think there are any scenes that do nothing for the movie. Like, there aren't any scenes where you go, you could cut that. I don't think.
One scene I wanted, and this is a moment of subtlety that actually some elements of the movie doesn't have. The scene where Ben and Matt's characters look at each other after Minnie Driver gets in the car and says about his brothers, and it's clear to Ben Affleck's character that Will has lied about this. You can tell in the look, he knows that she's talking bollocks, but we don't get to see. It's such a shame that we don't get to see that scene of, why the fuck what are you doing? Why are you lying to her? Like, she's great and you're starting things off on a lie. But I also equally quite like that we don't get that scene because that's potentially not a discussion those guys would have. It clearly takes weeks for him to even ask about her again.
Yeah, exactly. I was just about to say that. I kind of took from that it was like he didn't bring it up, that they never really had that chat. But I tell you another scene that's just really great. It's another example of a scene that just works on its own. They did the NSA scene, and he gives the big speech where he goes through the theoretical scenario where if he worked for the NSA, what could happen. And then it ends with him being like, you know what, to save some time might be better than just to shoot my buddy, club a baby seal, and goes through that whole thing. That is an incredible moment in the movie. Like, such a fun sequence of events combined with a really great speech.
Regardless of kind of the genius plots and plot and how that plays into the structure, whether it's kind of executed well, again within the scenes, the writing does a brilliant job of making complex ideas accessible. You follow the bar scene debate between him and the college student. You follow that. And it is, and there is a version of this script where Will is just garbling nonsense. The NSA scene and that scene in particular, where Will's just garbling nonsense that the audience can't follow. There's a version of the script where it could not feel like the same character spouting this stuff as the character that is interacting with Ben Affleck and Casey Affleck in a bar. But the writing of those scenes and making it accessible and making it feel consistent with the character is fantastic. There's some those scenes, regardless of structurally how they work and whether there's enough of them and all of that sort of stuff, those two scenes in particular, the writing is really spot on in them.
Yeah, I think so. It's tricky, though, because there's a part of me that goes like, again, it's like two people sort of like trying to ape what they think smart people talk like, and there are occasionally clunky bits of dialogue within those scenes. Things like, I remember that class, like every time he says, I remember that class, I just want to fucking lamp the laptop or the TV. I'm just like, it's such a dumb line. Like, I don't know.
I think that's
I do stand by Dan Harmon's criticism of the "How do you like them apples" scene. I think he's right. I think that doesn't make any sense at all. But that's
well.
Fine.
What's his, for those that don't know, what's his criticism of it?
Oh, so yeah, Dan Harmon's criticism of the "How do you like them apples" scene is it requires the guy to answer yes to the question, "Do you like apples?" And if you tried to do that in real life, what would probably happen is this exchange: "Do you like apples?" "What? Do you like apples?" I mean, as much as anybody, but I don't really understand why are you asking about apples? No, but you need to say yes so I can do my line. But I'm not going to say exactly what you're expecting me to say. And if you've pre-planned a line, maybe you shouldn't have it rely on me answering yes to a question. It's basically that. Like, because he's right. He went up with the plan to say, "How do you like them apples?" What if he'd said no? "Do you like apples?" "No." "Well, how do you like these apples?" Like, it's such an insane moment.
Well, would you, do you like getting numbers? "Yeah." "Well, I got this number."
Yeah. So
he had a plan.
It's the moment, you really do. It is a fist pump moment, but the second you put any thought into that exchange, you go, "Oh yeah, that doesn't make any sense whatsoever."
I think the writing how smart people talk criticism is fair. I think it's more applicable for me in the NSA scene than the bar scene, because I think there's an element of it's kind of an heightened environment. Like the college guy is literally doing the impression of how smart people talk, because that's what he's doing to try and impress the women in the bar. Yes. And that's the point of it. And Matt Damon's character is mocking him. And that's the point of that. So I think that's a slight counter to that point. Maybe.
Yeah, and I think with the NSA one, I think what's interesting about the NSA scene is it's like it's not even really him spouting smart stuff. It's him actually bringing his level of intelligence like to a very human place, because what he's actually essentially saying is, governmentally, I understand the weight of what I would be doing within your government and how it might affect and how it might, I solve your math equation and, I might feel real good because I like being good at my job. But then, and he lays out this thing that's a genuinely very reasonable sequence of events that might follow from it. And when I didn't really watch this film with Nadia, but after it finished, she actually got home as I finished watching it. And I showed her just that scene, that NSA scene, because I just thought it was I didn't remember that scene very well. Mostly the scenes, the major scenes I'd remembered. But this is one of the smaller ones that I didn't remember that speech at all. And I actually thought it was really clever, because what he essentially does is take them solving him, then making him just solve math equations, which he seems to enjoy doing and is obviously very good at, and turns it into this weirdly personal. He finds this weirdly personal reason not to do it, because he brings it right down to this poor veteran that it's a buddy of his in Southie that can't get to work anymore because the oil prices are high and he's got shrapnel in his ass and all that stuff. And I know they're they write it quite verbosely to make him seem like really smart, but I actually think because it goes so personal, because it's so about his weird connection to sort of South Boston, and that sort of personal element, that human element, they get away with it in that scene, but for a different reason. But that's not one of the worst offenders in terms of scenes where characters just spout nonsense at each other, which there are a couple of. But yeah, I that NSA scene actually was I wouldn't go as far to say like a revelation, but it was a scene that hadn't really stuck out on any of my initial viewings that I thought really stuck out on this viewing as being a strong moment, both from a storytelling perspective, because it says a lot about his character and where his loyalties lie, and his loyalties lie with his boys back in Southie, but also I just think it's a really well written scene, because obviously it starts in that NSA office and switches to the therapy room, which is a really good transition. The performance is great, and I think the way it's written works really well.
So you've teased it, Dan. Tell me about Ben Affleck's acting.
Oh dear Lord. right. Just anyone who's got access to this movie through a streaming service or whatever, just bear with me. It'll be fine. I'll find the point. I'll find the point, guys. It's here on my thing. Skip to about 1 hour 59 and 30 seconds into the movie, which is right towards the end, and I'll describe it to you because I've got it on in front of me right now, Chris. Ben Affleck's walking up to the house. This is pretty casual. He's just walking up to the house. That part's fine, and then it's the shots from inside the house looking out at him as he has to act the very important moment of realizing his buddy isn't there, right? And he knows it's integral to the script. He knows it. And I've never seen an actor show it more on his face. Particularly, actually, 1 hour... almost exactly the 2 hour mark to the second, actually, is when the shot from inside the house looking out at Affleck, he's sort of standing there, asking him to come out, and he looks so uncomfortable. He's sort of like shuffling back and forth.
He sort of reacts twice. He smiles twice. That's what got me. I was like, you've already smiled, man. But
he like pulls back, and there's this really long shot on him when you can see him desperately not trying to look into the camera, and he like has to pull back, and he's supposed to look shocked, and he just looks like a robot man. He stands there so stiffly, staring into the middle distance. It's so unnatural.
But here's the thing, Dan.
Then he takes a big old swallow. He takes a dramatic step back. He turns around, and then he pauses again with his mouth half open, like he's trying to catch a fly. And then he gives a smile, and the smile is so forced and weird. It's all wrong. It's so wrong. Everything about it is wrong. If I'm Gus Van Sant, I'm like, mate, come back tomorrow. Let's do this again when you're not as fucking stiff. It's any other take, please. It's awful. He might as well. I said this to Dad yesterday. You might as well turn to the camera and say, "I'm acting."
Well, it's almost like dialogue would help him. It's almost like he did it or something like that would help. But I didn't think it was as egregious as you. But I can see what you're saying. But here's my counter.
Honestly, Chris, I cannot remember another time in a Hollywood movie where I was that conscious that the actor was being like, "Do acting, do acting, do acting here. Please do acting here. Hopefully this is good acting. Is this good acting? I think I might be doing some acting." Like, it's all over his body movement, his face. It's so stiff. I couldn't believe that it made it into the movie, honestly.
Here's the thing, though.
Yes.
That scene, I'll take him being like that in that scene over him being like that in the scene where they talk when they're on the car on the construction site. Do you know what I mean? That's the scene he needs to be brilliant in, and he's very good in that scene.
Yeah, I mean, it would have been nice for him to have been good in both, because I do think also,
of course,
selling
I'm not denying that.
Him selling the because it's one thing for a character to say that's how they'll react that day and explain it because the script has the words. And then for an actor to emote it on the day. I think I'd have gotten a lot more out of the scene where he discovers Will has moved on if I'd have gotten a good performance there. It's so bad.
I tell you a subtlety.
It is impossibly bad. I don't know. And again, I'm not jumping on the Ben Affleck hate train. I think Ben Affleck is actually quite talented. I've seen several of the movies he's directed. I think he's good at that too. I've seen several movies he's been in as an actor, and I think he's been great in them. I have no problem with Ben Affleck. I know it's one of those things where it's like everyone jumps on Ben Affleck sometimes. He's a bit of an easy target. But I genuinely have no issue with 99% of the Ben Affleck stuff I have seen in my lifetime. But holy shit, dude.
Yeah, and like I say, I didn't find it as egregious. But I tell you one subtle moment in that scene that I love because it felt so real was a Casey, and apologies that I can't remember the name of Ben and Casey Affleck's characters, but Casey Affleck's character just being pleased that it meant he could move up to the front seat.
Yes.
And not reacting with any concern or any basically not really reacting to the fact that his mate had disappeared at all. Simply being like, "Hey, front seat, woohoo!" That felt very real to me, and felt very like of something that character would do in that moment. And I'd never noticed that particularly before, but I got a real kick out of that on this rewatch.
Yeah. Apparently, Casey Affleck had ad-libbed a lot of his lines in this movie. He's great in this. I was surprised to see Casey Affleck was in the movie. I didn't remember that part, if I'm being honest.
No, me neither.
But he's great. One of
the strengths of this movie is the scenes where the friends are interacting. When they're interacting with Minnie Driver in the bar, and they're sort of doing the whole "let him tell the story" and "come on, why are you interrupted?" Like those scenes, and I don't know whether it was in the script, whether it's the ad libs, whether it's something that the director brought out of them. But those scenes felt very real and very strong. Some of the movie's best stuff.
I think there's a lot of stuff
the directing in general.
To be honest, I think the movie does have an authenticity to a lot of it. Like I think in terms of like the way that the characters interact, there's a messiness to it that feels real, and that could be really clever writing, or actually could be very inept writing. It could be two new screenwriters who don't know the rules of how characters should interact in movies, just letting it be a bit sloppy because they don't know any better, and it's geniusly kind of worked into the movie's favour because it makes it feel very realistic. Or if they were very intentional, I couldn't speculate necessarily on whether it was intent or whether it was sort of accidental, but it does work. Like in any scene, like even small things, like it's small asides that the characters throw in, especially in like. Well, obviously all the scenes with the friends, but even in scenes where he's talking to his therapist, where he's talking to Robin Williams' character, whose name I keep forgetting. What's the character called? That's going to kill me. Sean, thank you. With Sean's character, and it's like, you spend all this money on your education, you buy all these books, and you got the wrong books. And Robin Williams' character just offhandedly is like, "What are the right books, Will?" And it's like, Will never responds to that question. He moves on, but like that is what you'd say, right? A script doctor would say to you, "Why does he need that line?" You're never going to have him answer the question, "Why do you need the books?" Cut that line, and you can just move on with the scene. But that's the right reaction, correct? Yeah, I'd ask that question. If someone came to my house, told me I'd spent all this money on all these books and they were the wrong books, I'd be like, "What the fuck are the right ones, then, dickhead? What do you know?" So there's something very naturalistic about it. But again, I couldn't tell you for love nor money if it was intent or if it was accident. But it works really well, so I'm not complaining. I'm just observing.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Those scenes again, it's the isolation. The early scenes of Sean and Will bonding, and Sean Will trying to goad him and working out he works the other therapist out really quickly, but the way they move around each other, and Will's trying to work out what buttons to press for Sean, and the books thing is as you've just described, failed. Like he tries that tact, it doesn't work. So then he moves to the painting and paint by numbers thing, and he tries that tact, and then he hits on the wife and is like, right, that's the thing I'm going to land on. Yeah. Like that scene again, just absolutely in isolation, and in the context, that one as well works beautifully. Is just really great stuff.
To be fair, their relationship, Will and Sean, is the relationship the movie takes the most time to actually develop convincingly, I think. Because as you said, the Minnie Driver stuff's a bit rushed. The stuff with Lambo, the professor, is weirdly rushed, where he goes from disliking him to ruffling his hair. Which, by the way, that scene's super awkward. He puts his arm around him. I was like, dude, you've known each other 2 minutes. So weird. Just don't do that.
So weird.
I know what you're getting at. Like I know the visual storytelling that's occurring here is you're trying to impart to me, the audience, that they are now getting on. I thumbs up. I understand, but please no. Just no, it's too much. But yeah, that the relationship that the movie really does, and I wrote this in my notes. Like, they really take their time showing Will being won over by Sean, They do that right, and I think that's the most important relationship of the movie to me. I understand your frustration that because obviously you're all about the love story. You know, you love a good love story, so I understand your frustration.
But that was just my memory of it. That was a bigger part. I would much rather have Sean and Will be the focus.
Right? I wasn't
way
suggesting
more important.
you were implying it should have been differently in terms of focus, but one of your criticisms was that maybe that they didn't do quite right with the Mini Driver character because they didn't take the time to set up some of the shifts in their relationship, like from early dating to basically being in love with each other. Now, you're right to observe.
Just to jump in on that, that for me is more frustrating because of the disservice to Mini Driver's character than it is the disservice to the love story.
Right. Okay. Sure. But again, it comes to the same thing to me from the perspective of the script. It's that it doesn't take enough time to show you the steps in between.
Yeah.
And it's the same problem you have with Will and Lambert, the other professor, Lambo. I've got it. That one I had in front of me. The one that works, the one that is most functional, is his relationship with Sean, because that's the one they really do take the time on. Now, you could argue they should have taken the time on all the relationships Will has, since they're all very important to the ending of the movie. But it's that I guess they made their choice when they were balancing out the script, and the choice was his relationship with Sean, and that is the only real relationship that develops in this movie slowly and carefully, without many major leaps where you suddenly go, how'd you get there?
And it's funny because I heard an interview last night with Ben Affleck, and he talks about how they knew they needed to attract a big movie star. So one of the things they did was deliberately write a role that had loads of juicy monologues but could also be filmed quickly. So a role that would basically be resigned to one location and could just sort of be powered through. And it's amazing how the best aspect of the movie, I would argue, comes from that sort of keeping it within those parameters.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I am kind of convinced that a lot of this movie is an accident.
Yeah.
Because, as has been pointed out, two first-time writers, pulling it together, and here it is winning best, Oscar for best screenplay or whatever. It does feel, when you hear stories like that, you go, oh, so that thing that I really liked about your script is actually just you were trying to think of a quick way to get a movie star in the movie. So you designed it around all those scenes. So yeah, it's almost a shame to hear stuff like that. It's a bit the same like when we were doing the trivia for Die Hard, and we discovered so much of that movie was kind of figured out on the fly, and was kind of, there's a lot of lucky coincidences, when they were putting the feature together. But yeah, it's good.
Sorry, go on.
No, go
on. One person who I think deserves a lot of credit for deliberately creating those accidents, who we've not talked about yet, is Gus Van Sant, who's the director. The direction of this, from the choices of the camera, things like, Dan mentioned earlier, that cut between in the Nsa Scene, which might have been an editor, but Gus gave them that option. The way that the setting feels like a character.
They chose to shoot in both locations and had that. So yeah, I'm willing to bet that was a big part of it. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I was just verifying your point.
The way the location just feels like part of it, without ever. It's not like we need a lot of sweeping establishing shots. It just all feels quite raw. The bars feel quite dingy, the way they've been lit, the way they've been shot and directed. It's some beautiful directing, and I think he had a big impact on the film.
Yeah, because I think especially the tone, because it feels like the script was kind of like the script when he got there. I will go into the trivia in a bit. The script went through some shifts, but it was pretty much this, I think, by the time Gus joined the project. But I will say, the tone of the movie, the sort of soft focus, the use of the sort of that very light music, it's all very sort of feels on the surface kind of light and fluffy, but then obviously gets into deeper, darker stuff. I don't know, that it's got this kind of playful tone to it that you can't. I I don't think you get with another director. Like, I know there was a point when Kevin Smith nearly directed this, apparently. No. I like Kevin Smith, but it wouldn't have had the warmth, I don't think, that it ends up having.
To be fair to Kevin Smith, the quote on the Wikipedia is that Ben Affleck asked him to direct it, and he told him no, they need a good director, and that he wouldn't be able to direct it and do it justice.
Yeah, that's interesting, because that's very interesting, because the quote I've got also from Kevin Smith is that he said that he when he was offered it by Miramax, he knew the boys had their hearts set on Gus at the time.
Right.
And he said no so they could get Gus. Because Gus was next in line. Either way, both kind of make sense. It could be a little bit of column A, a little bit of column B on that one. Kevin Smith has talked about so many things so many times over the years that sometimes, like, you know, there are slightly different variants on the same story with the same outcome. So it wouldn't surprise me if both of that is true, if that makes sense. He thought Gus would do a better job, and he knew that's who the boys wanted. So I think overall, I think there is some structural stuff. I think for me, though, the biggest problem with this movie is that actually, when you talk about this film, and a lot of people talk about this film, they talk about how it's a big, deep character study. For me, it's pretty shallow on that front. It thinks it's deeper than it is. He's a pretty straightforward character that has, you know, intentionally done a lot of self-sabotage because he has these, like, you know, issues of valuing himself, presumably through having a rough time growing up. He's got a real chip on his shoulder about who he is, but he constantly keeps himself as who he is. Like, he's not allowing himself to rise above his station because he's convinced he's worthless. And that's an interesting enough character to make a movie about. I'm not criticizing that choice, but I think the movie sort of thinks that's more revolutionary than it is. He's not that complex a character, and when all the characters around him are talking about how genius and interesting and how complex he is, the whole thing just rings a bit hollow when you figure out towards the end of the movie that he's actually just sort of, like, you know, self-sabotaging because he doesn't see any value in himself, which is actually quite a simple topic, you know, too scared to put himself out there. And that plays out in all of the various relationships that are around him, other than his relationship with Sean. You know, with Minnie Driver, he's too scared to be honest with her and say that he loves her because he's worried she'll leave him, so he's going to end that before that gets to happen. You know, with his boys in Southie, he's too scared to he's too scared to sort of leave them and be better because he you know, he's happy to just work on a construction site the rest of his life, but he's not really. He's just too scared to take those first steps. And the same with his relationship with the professor. The professor sees all this stuff in him, but he keeps self-sabotaging, sending Ben Affleck's character, who I've just looked up, is called Chucky. There you go. We've been calling him Ben Affleck's character this whole thing. I just want to make it clear now. The character is apparently called Chucky. There you go. You know, sending him to do the interviews is another self-sabotage move, right? He plays it as like, oh, I'm just too cool and above all this, so I'm sitting with my buddy for fun, because I'm, you know, funsies. So when you think about it, like, the movie, like, tries to be really complicated, or when I think about it at least, it tries to be really, like, deep and complex, but actually everything is just telling us this one very simple thing about this character, and I think that's actually weirdly shallow for a movie that's very insistent that it's not. So actually, for me, the structural stuff, sure, is potentially an issue also, but for me the bigger swing and miss for this movie is that the movie is very insistent that he's an interesting, complex character, but doesn't really deliver on that. So there you go.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think my big takeaway was kind of what we talked about. I was just so bamboozled how it was more of a collection of scenes than I remember, but I completely understand would even go as far to say maybe even agree with anyone sat there going, yeah, but I fucking love those scenes and it works for me because of that. And I'd be like, yep, fair enough. Like, yeah, absolutely fair enough. There are bigger flaws a movie could have than that. And I think that, you know, there'll be anyone I can equally imagine, you know, I think as you've just described, those feelings of insecurity and all the things that movie explores. If someone watched that and resonated with that, then this is going to hit hard and hit home for them. And I can see, scenes like It's Not Your Fault really emotionally resonating with people. I can absolutely see why this film is a classic. I would absolutely recommend that for this film. And whilst I think from a critical point of view, as we've established, those flaws are there, actually there's a lot you can get from this movie and from the scenes. I would personally, moving forward, if I have that itch, I'd watch those scenes. It's probably the best way to view this movie is to view it once and then go back and check out that stuff, maybe, for me personally. But if you're sat there going, I fucking love this movie, it speaks to me, can completely see why. It's not this movie ain't Last Action Hero. I think this movie was one of the reasons for choosing this movie was a bit of a palate cleanser, because we'd had a few ropey movies, and I think it has worked as a palate cleanser, for sure. It's a strong movie.
Yeah, because equally, if somebody told me that they just really enjoyed it because they sort of turn their brain off, let it wash over them, it's full of emotions and characters doing fun things, Yeah, you're right. Yeah, it is. It's really entertaining. Like, the entertainment value of this movie is high. It is. And that's, the movie is no one. This movie didn't come out and its marketing was like, you will find this movie clever, you will find this movie Oscar worthy, you will find this to be a prestige movie. They made their dumb little movie, right? Like, they didn't. That baggage is what we bring to it, I feel. And
specifically, I think our generation, because,
yes,
as we discussed, I think the reason for that is because it's so accessible. Now,
right,
that accessibility from an older critical point of view identifies challenges with the movie, but it is also one of the reasons it's so popular, because it feels like that, but it's fucking accessible. It's just maybe when you watch it with a critical eye, you go, oh, it's accessible, though, for these reasons.
Yeah. 100%. So, yeah, I think, should you watch this? Yeah, it's a really fun, entertaining watch. Some really good acting, some really great choices from the director, some nice music. It's all there. It's flawed, and again, we've had to explain this on a few of our podcasts. But if you ever listen to an episode of this where we say we recommend the movie, but we talk a lot about the flaws, it's because often, it's way less interesting sometimes to talk about the stuff that works for a popular movie, because everyone already knows what's good about this movie. People have talked about what's good about this movie for years.
Yeah, no one.
For us, when we sit down and watch it with a critical eye, it's an interesting. Sometimes it's interesting to discover these movies have these flaws.
No one's tuning in to hear Dan and I for 10 minutes go, Robin Williams is fucking giving a good performance, isn't he? Right. Of course he is, and he is. It's a stunning performance. Some of any scene where Robin Williams talks about his wife is some of the best acting you're gonna ever see. It's phenomenal. But people don't necessarily need us to talk about that for 20 minutes.
Right, no, so they don't. And because, again, some of the obvious things that people already know famously are good about the movie are still there and good. So, yeah, apologies if you come here looking for us a bit of a love fest and we sort of ended up being focusing on the sort of more critical aspects. It was just interesting. I think, for me, I was surprised to discover that this movie was more flawed than I thought. I was with Chris when Chris selected this and we'd watched a few movies that we weren't as fond of. I was like, because Gremlins I think is basically a masterpiece, but can't win them all. But I didn't particularly care for Die Hard 2.
And to be fair, Dan, I feel Die Hard 2 is a masterpiece. Like you say, can't win them all.
But yeah, it's funny that the idea was that we do a palate cleanser, and we've ended up sitting down and sort of talking about what doesn't work about this classic movie.
But I think the difference is in this podcast we've been going, we're identifying flaws in a great movie, whereas in Last Action Hero, Die Hard 2, it was these are why it's not a good movie. Although I do have an affection for Die Hard 2. But do you know what I mean? Certainly Last Action Hero, it was, well, to be fair, I had a fucking great time with that as well. But, when one of us has been saying that, both of us here have been going, these are some flaws and things we didn't remember about a great movie. Whereas in the times where we've, Dan's not liked Die Hard 2, I've been a bit iffy on Gremlins, it's been very much, these are the reasons we didn't enjoy it. Neither of us are saying we didn't enjoy Good Will Hunting. We're saying that we went, I didn't remember that. So,
yeah.
But Dan, is it time? Are we going to triv it up? No, wait, that wasn't very good. Triv it up!
Chris, I think you owe it to yourself. The first one was bad. The second one was very good. But I think you owe it to yourself and the listeners to do a more smooth segue into that. So they can just have a complete. And now, Dan, we're moving into trivial. Because you gave the bad one, and then you just gave the good one with no preamble. I think the listeners deserve the full experience of moving into the triv.
That critique stung. Now I know what it feels like to be Matt Damon and Ben Affleck listening to this.
or at least Ben Affleck.
Okay. It's time, Dan. Let's triv it up!
That was good.
Worth
that
it.
That was very good. Big fan.
You felt like Gus Van Sant in that moment. Pushing, but for the right reasons.
Yeah. And you know what now, Chris? I'm going to give you some trivia. Here we are. I did it. Yeah. We did it, everyone. The trivia for this is bonkers. And can I just say, listeners, this took way longer than it should have done because the trivia for this was so scattered in small details that seemed to contradict each other, and it took me a while to put together the full story of how we got here. So just bear with me while I go through some of these first pieces, because we're all just leading to one piece of trivia about a removed sex scene, and we'll talk about it. But just let me get us to that, because when I read the trivia for that scene, I couldn't make any sense of what the fuck was happening. So I've had to go back and engineer this trivia to make it make sense. So this took way longer than it should have done. Way longer. I'm glad I woke up early this morning to do the triv before the podcast. My alarm went off at 7:30 for a podcast we were recording at 9, and this is why. Hopefully it'll be worth it. So when Matt Damon was in his 5th year at Harvard, he was in a playwriting class. The culmination of that class was to write a one-act play, which was the very earliest version of what this movie is. With the help of Ben Affleck, they then put it together into an actual screenplay. Now, they pitched the script around a lot as their careers were starting to grow. I don't think either had been a leading man yet, though. And it was a bit tricky. But eventually, they sold it to Castle Rock Entertainment. Now, a little bit of tiny side trivia is that it was actually printed in Variety that they were going to get $600,000 for the script, and they actually used the copy of Variety to get themselves a good price on a house. Like, look, we're earning a lot of money. We can afford this. I think that's kind of genius.
Yeah, that is both baller and dick. Like, yeah, that's a baller move and a dick move, and I respect it for both.
Absolutely. So an early version of the script, rather than having Will being sort of discovered by the mathematician and sort of brought to a point where he could choose to do things, he was actually recruited early on in the movie by the government to become a crypto analyst, based on his mathematical ability. But Rob Reiner, who was was basically running Castle Rock at the time, reviewed the script and advised Matt and Ben to eliminate this subplot. However, there is still obviously a reference to the scene in the final script, the scene where he meets the NSA agents but refuses and explains why he won't work with them. So when Castle Rock were requesting all these rewrites, it wasn't just that. There were several things they were asking them to rewrite. The two started to become suspicious that they weren't having their rewrites being fully read. They were just asking for stuff and assuming they were doing it and not really paying attention to what was going into the scripts. So they started writing in things. So this is from Ben Affleck. He said this to the Boston Magazine in 2013. We were so frustrated that Castle Rock wasn't reading the script, so we felt like we had to develop this test. We started writing in scene direction, like Sean talks to Will and unloads his conscience. And that developed into Will takes a moment and then gives Sean a soulful look and then leans in and starts blowing him. We would turn that in and they wouldn't mention all those scenes where Sean and Will are jerking each other off. So after Matt Damon...
Equal baller and dick as a move.
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, these scenes weren't intended to actually be in the movie. They were testing Castle Rock. So, around the point in which Castle Rock had sort of asked them to remove the NSA stuff, it became clear that no one really knew what to do with this movie. Castle Rock had it in development hell for a long time. No one was really happy with how the relationship was turning out. As we already established, Matt and Ben were getting frustrated that they weren't reading the rewrites they were asking for. It's like, what do you want from us? You ask us for the rewrite, then you don't read the new rewrite, and then you don't read it properly, and then you ask us for more rewrites. It's just this frustrating cycle. So there's an option when a script is at this point to put it into what's called turnaround. And what turnaround means is this studio no longer knows what the fuck to do with this script. But if the writers, or whoever's attached to it, wants to shop it around, another studio will be able to buy it for what it's basically currently cost Castle Rock to do. So whatever they've currently invested into it, so the money they spent when they optioned it originally, which I think they said was $600,000, plus any costs that they've incurred since, hiring, anyone to come in and look at it, script doctors to meet with Ben Affleck and Matt Damon, whatever they might have spent money on. So they put it into turnaround, and Ben Affleck and Matt Damon were free to start shopping it around. Now, it's worth adding that there was a clause to this. There was a price to this. Castle Rock's stipulation was that if they were not able to find someone to buy it off Castle Rock would then take the script from them and produce the movie without them in the lead roles. Which is the whole reason.
Brad Pitt and Leonardo DiCaprio were who they wanted.
Brad Pitt and Leonardo DiCaprio, who are reportedly were the top picks, but obviously no one had even reached out to them yet because legally, based on when the script was sold, it was sold for them to be in it. So I don't believe they were even ever contacted. But that was Castle Rock's dream casting for this movie. Sorry, 1 second, Chris. I think I have a small bit of glass in my foot.
Shit! Do you need to go sort that?
No, I'm just gonna leave it. I'm gonna actually put it to the side. We're nearly done. I'll get it out with some tweezers in a minute. I realise that's a strange thing. There was a glass broken the other day, and I went and stepped in the kitchen barefoot this morning, and now there's pain. There's pain there, and I only just realised it because I was distracted discussing the movie, I guess. Anyway, so they took it around, but what they did when they started taking it around was they left in. On, I think it's about page 60, a very detailed sex scene. I don't think between Will and Sean, but between the professor and Sean. And the idea was, would any studio who read the script notice that scene was very out of place? Sudden, not really logical for the script because we've already established that Sean particularly was straight, he had a wife. They were like, let's see if anyone notices. So they sent it out to all these studios with this insane scene in it. Or not insane, but in the context of the movie, completely insane scene in it. To see if anyone would bring it up. One of the studios it went to was Miramax. And it was actually because at the time, Affleck was working on Chasing Amy, which was his first, I think, lead role. And he'd given the script to Kevin Smith, and Kevin Smith had put it on the desk of Harvey Weinstein. Now, we're about to talk about, very briefly, Harvey Weinstein. I am very sorry. Get your booze out of the way. He made a lot of movies. He's going to come up. Obviously, without, going into the details, obvious monster. Glad he's not making movies no more. Should have figured it out sooner, I guess. Just goes without saying, the prerequisite that boo Harvey Weinstein. Okay, now I'm going to tell you the story.
Dan doesn't endorse Harvey Weinstein. That's what he's saying here.
Correct.
He's very clear on that.
But I'm about to quote him, and that feels inherently weird, but, there you go.
Relevant to the story.
Relevant to this story. So he was on the Graham Norton show, and had said on the Graham Norton show, every studio wanted the movie. Every studio wanted them to be in the movie and make this film. Because I guess they were starting to get more popular at this time now. They were young kids, they were just starting out, but they had some good roles behind them. They came to my office, and I'd read the script before the meeting. We walked in, we had a pleasant... and we walked in, everything was pleasant, and about 10 minutes into the meeting, I said, guys, there's just one thing in the script. I have one really big note. About page 60, the two professors give each other oral sex, and they're on their knees. There's this whole big sex scene. What's that there for? Because as far as I know, the guys are straight, and there isn't a hint of anything like that. I don't really get the point of the scene. And apparently, they replied, that's the scene we wrote to find out whether guys in your job will actually read the script. Because every studio executive we went to, no one else has brought the scene up so far. Or maybe people thought it was a mistake, or nobody actually read it. But either way, you're the only guy that's brought it up so far, you get the movie.
It's crazy.
And that...
Absolute
listeners,
madness.
It's how this movie ended up at Miramax, being produced by Weinstein.
Absolute madness, isn't it?
I mean, going from Castle Rock to that story about how Weinstein ended up with the movie is an insane story.
Yeah.
Flat out bonkers.
Yeah. But again, and equal parts baller and dick move.
Right, agreed.
So risky. Why would you not? No one else brought it up. Well, maybe that's because a bunch of people read it and went, well, this is shit. And such a risky move.
That's a really good point. I didn't even think of that. But yeah, maybe the other studios did bring it up because they just thought it was an insane scene.
Yeah. Oh, someone's mowing outside. If that's being picked up, I apologise.
I'm sure it's fine. We say that a lot. I very rarely end up hearing it when we listen to the actual recording.
Yeah, I've had my... Do you remember that day my computer sounded like it was going to take off? Yes. And I was like, oh, God. And then I listened and you couldn't hear a thing. So, yeah, I'm sure it's fine. But if it is there,
I do love these microphones. We don't plug them enough, but these are the Zoom H2Ns. I don't think they make them anymore, or if they do, they're limited run. But they're very good.
Yeah, you could pick one. They're quite expensive to pick up now because they don't make them. But I think, I looked on Amazon recently and you could technically, but it was like 180 quid, which isn't what we paid.
I think we paid 140, to be fair.
Yeah, we did pay quite a bit, but it felt more expensive. Anyway.
Yeah. Anyway,
what we got next? Now let's move on. As we always do, Dan. Let's move on from oral sex and. Tell us what you got next.
So once it was at Miramax, a few different directors were offered the chance to direct it. Mel Gibson apparently was offered after a meeting with David and Affleck, but ultimately he passed on it. But apparently a little side triv, when they met Mel Gibson, Braveheart had just come out, but they hadn't seen it. But Harvey Weinstein advised them just to lie. So the first thing apparently they said to him was, we just want to tell you how much we loved Braveheart. The next person they went to was Michael Mann, who expressed a lot of interest in directing. He liked the script. However, he wanted to make two major changes. He wanted to make Will and his friends car thieves. I don't know why. And he didn't want Matt Damon to play Will. At the time, he was relatively unknown. But the producers Weinstein did want Damon, so they suggested that Michael Mann film some test scenes with David and Affleck. They filmed those test scenes, and then he still didn't want Damon for the role. So they just were like, right, well, we want Damon for the role, so you're not the right guy to direct this then. And that is how Michael Mann ended up not directing this movie. There's no detail here about how they came to Gus Van Sant. No, there is, because obviously then they offered it to Kevin Smith, who turned it down because he knew that Matt and Damon's first choice was Gus Van Sant, as we already mentioned. Once signed on, Gus Van Sant at one point asked Matt and Ben to rewrite the script so that Chucky is killed in a construction accident. David and Affleck protested, but reluctantly wrote the scene in. After Van Sant read it, he then decided it was indeed a terrible idea, and it was removed from the script.
Just a lot of people learning on this movie, isn't there?
Yeah. Yeah. Apparently, at one point, Ben Stiller was offered the role as well, and to direct the film, and turned it down. It's unclear at what point in the production cycle that happened, but yeah, it's a decision he's mentioned having regretted since. So during that time, once they'd landed on Gus Van Sant, they started looking at casting and stuff, and Harvey Weinstein apparently did not want Minnie Driver at all for the role of Skylar. He didn't think she was, and this is again Harvey Weinstein, boo. He didn't feel she was cute enough for the part.
Jesus.
Yeah. But Gus Van Sant, Matt Damon, the signs were there. Gus Van Sant, Matt Damon, and Affleck all really thought she was going to be great for the movie. So Weinstein kind of relented. And Driver obviously went on to be nominated as Best Actress in Supporting Role at the Oscars for this film. Thoroughly deserved. She's very good in the movie. So there you go. That worked out.
She's brilliant. I think she elevates that character to a point that isn't on the page in my theory, opinion, whatever.
Yes. She 100% she does. Yeah, she 100% does. In a Boston Magazine retrospective interview, Ben Affleck mentioned that he and Matt Damon had written the part of Sean with Morgan Freeman or Robert De Niro in mind as their sort of Hollywood star. And apparently when they were doing the writing the script, he and Damon would imitate their voices when reviewing dialogue. I think that's a fun idea.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah, but I'd almost rather see them intimidating them than I would actually like to see them in the roles.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Yeah, I agree. So apparently, when it finally got into shooting after several years of all of that chaos, Affleck and Damon were basically crying on set because it was just to see, particularly because the first day of shooting was Robin Williams and Stellan Skarsgård together. And seeing two accomplished actors doing their dialogue verbatim, they'd sort of waited 5 years for that to happen, so it was a very emotional point for them. Proud of them. It's the little picture that could. Good for them.
Yeah, absolutely it is.
So the lines in the scene where Sean talks about his late wife's farting antics were ad-libbed by Robin Williams. That is why Matt Damon was laughing so hard. If you watch the scene carefully, you notice the camera slightly shaking, possibly due to the cameraman laughing as well. So that's nice. Yeah, there's definitely a few moments in this you can tell Robin Williams is doing his usual Robin Williams thing.
Yeah, like I said earlier, it's a masterclass from Robin Williams.
Agreed. So the painting that hangs in Sean Maguire's office was actually painted by Gus Van Sant himself.
Oh, nice.
Oh, that was fun. A little bit of...
that is fun.
Yeah. The room number to Skylar's door is 206, which is the number of bones in the human body. She's a pre-med major, so... for funsies.
Cool. That is one of those details where you just go, nice detail, adds nothing. Lovely.
Yeah, that's one of those details that you go, is that trivia? Or is that a coincidence? Is that trivia? Or is that a coincidence?
I'm sure it was deliberate. I just don't think it needs to be talked about. Not you picking it. I mean, someone commenting on it.
Yeah. Casey Affleck reportedly ad-libbed most of his lines. Matt Damon, Ben Affleck, and Gus Van Sant later admitted that Casey's improvised lines were often much funnier than what had been written for him. So, fair. Apparently, when Robin Williams won the Oscar for his supporting role, for some reason, just this guy, but not the others, I guess, but he sent Pierre Augustinski, who dubbed his voice in German, a small replica of the Oscar statue with a note saying, "Thank you for making me famous in Germany."
Oh, that's nice.
That's very nice. But is it just that's the one that was discussed? Did he send it to all of his dub people? Because, I assumed that movie was dubbed in possibly hundreds of languages. Did he send them all one? Or
maybe
just specifically that guy? I was a bit confused by that.
Maybe it did particularly well in Germany.
Yes, that could very well be it.
I'd love it if the next piece of trivia was like, Good Will Hunting is the best-selling movie ever in Germany.
No, not quite, but yes, that is funny. It specifically made all of its money in Germany. While a guest on The Late Show with David Letterman in 93, Robin Williams joked about the experience of winning an Oscar for this role. He said, "It's amazing. When you win an Academy Award, you have like about a week where everyone's like, 'Hey, Good Will Hunting, way to go. Good Will Hunting, Academy Award, way to go.' And about 2 weeks later, it's back to, 'Hey, Mork, how are you?'" According to Matt Damon, Robin Williams' best addition is the last line of the film, which is the "stole my line" bit, which is really good and really does put a nice little tag to the film. I do love that.
Yeah. And again, like you just said, another improv. So that's two incredible moments that he made up.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
Casey Affleck made a load of stuff up. Robin Williams made a load of stuff up. And of course, obviously, Matt Damon and Ben Affleck won a script for Best Screenplay. I'm sure there's...
Well, no, they made a whole lot of stuff up because they made up everything else.
Yeah, no, I know. But so far, the triv has been... They randomly put a scene in about oral sex just to confuse people. Robin Williams made up some of the most iconic scenes in the movie. And Casey Affleck had to ad-lib because everything that was written for him wasn't as funny as what he was coming up with on the spot. And the Oscar goes to... It's a brilliant script. But
we'll get to that in a second, because there is another writer that had a persistent rumor around him as having worked on the script. We'll come to that in a minute. But one last piece of trivia before we get to that, and then we got our famous segment. In 2014, after Robin Williams died, the bench in Boston Public Garden, where he and Matt Damon had their conversation scene, became an impromptu memorial site. People left flowers, quotes, and various items at the bench. A petition has been passed around to erect a statue of Williams' memory near that bench. That would be lovely. I don't think that's happened thus far, but sure. Can't go wrong. Statue of Ron Williams. Yeah, delightful man.
Absolutely.
So, over the years, there have been persistent rumours and ideas about other people having a hand in this script, because they've not written anything since. And I think the actual answer of they've not written anything since is it's quite hard. And it's much easier just to keep being the star of a movie than it is to write a movie, I think.
But also,
show up other people's words, say them, go home.
They didn't write a movie to win an Oscar for writing. They wrote a movie to give themselves decent parts, to act as a jump. They wrote the movie to be actors. So I don't think now that it worked, they became actors.
Right. And it's not like Ben Affleck hasn't had the hand in scripts since, anyways, because script obviously, he's worked on some of the scripts for the movies he's directed, I believe. But anyway, there was a persistent rumor for a long time that a gentleman called William Goldman sort of had secretly written the script. Now, the reason this happened is because during the period of time when they were at Castle Rock, Goldman was brought in to meet with the boys when it was being asked of them to remove the FBI stuff that we talked about earlier. Actually, let me just read the quote from William Goldman, because he explained this better. So I think sadly he's passed away since, actually, William Goldman. But this is what he said at the WGA seminar, Writers Guild of America seminar in 2003. So he denied the persistent rumor that he was actually the writer of Good Will Hunting, saying, "I would love to say that I wrote it. Here is the truth. In my orbit, it will say that I wrote it. People don't want to think those two guys wrote it, but what happened was they had the script, it was their script, they gave it to Rob Reiner, and there was a great deal of stuff in the script dealing with the FBI, trying to use Matt Damon for spy work because he was so brilliant at math. Rob had said, get rid of it, then they had sent them to see me for a day. I met them in New York, and all I said to them was, Rob's right, get rid of the FBI stuff, go with the family, go with Boston, go with all that wonderful stuff. And they did. I think people refuse to admit it because their careers have been so far from writing, and I think that's too bad." He then went on to talk about Sylvester Stallone wrote Rocky, and then went on to be more of an actor than a writer. It just sometimes it works out that way for the reasons you lined out, Chris. Actually, I think more than anything, writing a role for yourself, and then it playing out, that you get that, and then you don't want to think. So I think that's very nice of William Goldman to set the record straight. I think that tracks with all the information I've gathered about their time at Castle Rock. I totally think it would make sense for Castle Rock to have them meet a script doctor, and have him just sort of confirm what Reiner wanted, and then them go off and do it. I think that tracks for me. So I don't believe personally anyone else wrote the movie.
No, I don't.
So there you go. Chris.
Yes.
It's time for our world famous segment. Are you ready? For Cars Exist. So there are two cars featured prominently in this movie. There's the car that the gang drive around in pretty much the entire movie. That is a 1976 Oldsmobile Delta 88. It's actually, I kind of like that. It's a proper, like, classic crappy American car, if that makes sense. Like, it's the car they seem to give a lot of, like, in these movies, and they're trying to show you that it's just like a working guy. He works in construction or whatever. He always seems to drive a car like this. But I think it's like a very fun kind of iconic look for a car. And then, of course, at the end of the movie, when they buy Will a car of his own, that's a 1971 Chevrolet Nova. Which has a very similar look to the Oldsmobile. So there you go. One's blue, one's red.
Cars exist.
Well, I don't know. The front grille's quite different, actually. But yeah, otherwise it's kind of a similar kind of vibe. So there you go.
Not because I happen to have the movie paused on the scene in the construction site where Ben delivers his "If you're still here, I'll kill you" speech, and it's not that car. So they're just having lunch. At least I don't think it's that car. So they're just having lunch on some other guy's car.
Are they really? Let me look. That can't be right.
They're just leaning on someone else.
I'm sure it's that car. Let me check. Come on, I've got the scene open, but it's this over the shoulder shots, like, so you can't see the car in either of these. Let me go back a bit, so it's the start of the scene.
And maybe.
No, you're right. It's some sort of, like, what is that? It's some sort of. It looks
Ford more like a truck. It's
a Ford pickup truck.
Yeah.
Where the fuck is the? What? Right, I'm heading over to the Internet Movie Database. Sorry, the Internet Movie Car Database, Chris, to find out what that car is. Because I just feel bad for
whoever owns that car. Oh yeah, they're always eating lunch on my car.
Yeah, they've got their lunch bags, they've got their hats and gloves all just on the dude's car. Whose fucking car is this? Right, let's see. It is a 1970 Ford F-Series Sport Custom. It looks like a pickup truck. It's got a big open back, so you can put stuff in it. But apparently it's some sort of custom dealie. But yeah, you're right. Different car. Fucking weird.
There we go.
Because I would have put money on it being that same car. To be honest with you, Chris, I was very sure, but you were absolutely right. There you go.
Weird.
That is so strange.
What's that?
That is all the truth, my friend.
That's all the truth. Lovely. Well, the big question then, Dan. The big question.
Ooh.
Where are we going next, baby?
So, I had a movie selected. Since we had this, since you said Good Will Hunting, I knew what my next movie was. That is until earlier in the week, Chris. A trailer came out for a movie that is a sequel of sorts to a movie I'm very fond of. And it made me really want to watch, in preparation, the movie I'm very fond of. But, that's not always an excuse to choose it for Rewind Reviews. Until I realised, Chris, that this sort of sequel to a movie I'm very fond of comes out 3 days after the next podcast is due.
Well, it's written in the stars then, Dan, isn't it?
Written in the stars. Because what are the odds that we'd be recording these sort of 8-9 weeks in advance and a trailer would come out for a movie, make me want to watch the original, and it would actually line up so when we release this, it will be out in a few days. So, Chris, I don't know if you can you guess? Actually, that's a fun game very quickly. Can you guess what movie I'm referring to?
No, I'm trying to think, and I can't offhand come up with anything, no.
No, okay, that's fine. Because this means I can surprise you with it here. So that's good. Next week, Chris, we are watching the 1987 classic Predator.
Yeah. Nice.
And the movie that I'm very excited about that's coming out around the time of release of that is a movie called Prey, which is Dan Trachtenberg's next movie. I'm very excited about it because I really like him as a director. I think it looks great, and it's sort of a prequel sequel to Predator. It's kind of it's sort of back to basics Predator movie where it's kind of like ignoring all the nonsense lore that's developed since and just going back to people trapped in a location with a predator, which is what I've wanted for a long, long time. So very excited. Really want to watch the first one again. And here we are.
Out of pure intrigue, what was the other film?
Well, now, Chris, I was wondering if you were going to ask me that. I'm going to keep that one if that's okay, because when I gave you the choice between two, it was only fair for me to ultimately tell you what they were. But in this case, it's probably something I'll choose again reasonably soon. I say reasonably soon. I don't think I have any more choices left this year. But yeah, I'll keep that one to myself if that's okay, and I'll come back to it.
Yeah, why not? Cool. So we are checking out Predator. That's exciting.
Have you seen Predator?
I think so. I think Ronnie made us watch it one day. I think
it is weird that we're doing two Arnold Schwarzenegger movies so close together, but I don't care.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, but that's just not a problem. Yeah, sometimes we do that deliberately. It's all good.
Yeah, I don't.
I mean, I'll tell you now.
It lined up too well to not do it.
Week after next, Kindergarten Cop, but
yeah, and then we're gonna follow that up with Stop My Mom Will Shoot.
Well, I think we then go into... Well, that was Sylvester Stallone.
Yes, I know. I was doing the thing about their rivalry in my brain.
I think after that we go into Lord of the Rings, but like you say...
No, yeah, there's one more choice. So that's going to come out on the 2nd of August, the Predator one. And then I think the movie Prey comes out 6th of August, I want to say. Something around then. And then we have an episode out on the 9th of August, which is your choice and going to be a random choice. And then I think 16th, 23rd, and 30th of August, if I've got the dates all lined up correctly, are all going to be the Lord of the Rings movies.
Nice. Well, join us next week for Predator. And if you want to listen to it earlier, then you can check out the Patreon, where you can find episodes a week in advance. You don't have to give much for that privilege. We've got very small tiers, but if you feel so inclined and want to help us out on that, then it really does mean the world. Equally, if you can't afford to, not a problem at all. Completely understandable and absolutely fine. You can find us on Twitter, Nothing But Static without the G. Mm-hmm. If you want to email us, I believe it's mail@nothingbutstatic. Dan will correct me if I'm wrong.
Mail at nothingbutstatic.co.uk.
Yep, and otherwise you can find Dan on Twitter at Dan Doolan. You can find me on Twitter at C Billingham. And then, otherwise you can find the podcasts on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, all your usual podcast places. You can check out the other main podcast we do called Nothing But Static, where we talk about current film and TV, mainly TV, but we occasionally, for the bigger movies, like Doctor Strange, etc., dive into them as well.
Yeah, and I think as well, if you're want to help us out and you don't want to commit as much as money to the Patreon, which I think is as little as $1 a month. But if you're not interested in financially supporting us but still want to support, you can share the podcast, tell a friend, or you can review us on any of the platforms Chris just mentioned. That's another great way you can support what we do.
Absolutely. So there you go. I'm Chris Billingham.
I'm Dan Doolan.
And this review has been rewound.